Welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Today, I am going to share my review of Savage Worlds Adventure Edition from Pinnacle Entertainment Group. This is designed and written by Shane Hensley with Clint Black. This 208-page A5 size hardcover carries an MSRP of $39.99, or you can grab just the PDF alone over at DriveThruRPG for $9.99, which I have to say, that is a smoking deal on the PDF. And that is not a special sale price. That's the everyday price on the PDF. All right, all that said, let's swing on over to the other camera, because here I've got Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. Before I dive in, a few things I do want to mention. First of all, the fine folks over at Pinnacle Entertainment Group were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. And these days, it's very, very important that you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of the book, but I do want to give you a very good feel for what you're going to find inside and share my thoughts about it as well. I'm also not going to focus on every tiny aspect mechanically of Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. I am going to talk about the core mechanics. I will talk about combat, but I'm not going to get into every situational rule that might be floating around in this core book. So keep that in mind. All right, let's jump on in. First thing to point out, if you're not familiar with Savage Worlds, it is a genreless role-playing system. Now, I know a lot of people refer to it as a generic role-playing system. I don't like to use the term generic when I'm talking about gaming, because generic is sort of like, well, not as good as a name brand. It's almost as good. So I'm just going to say this is a genreless system. Now, there are a slew of supplements out there for various different settings for Savage Worlds. So essentially, whatever sort of role-playing game you're interested in running and your players are interested in playing is probably tackled by Savage Worlds. This is the latest edition. This is the Adventure Edition. Now, Savage Worlds has been out for quite some time. I think Savage Worlds itself has been around for about 20 years. And mechanically, it goes even further back than that, because it originated with Deadlands, which was what established Pinnacle Entertainment Group way back in the day, which I owned. I used to pick up all the splats for it. Never ran it, but used to pick up all the dime novels and things like that because it was a very unique setting. And it is also available for Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. In fact, I've got a review of that coming up very shortly. So what you're going to do here is, as a player, the characters are going to come up with a concept. What is the sort of character they want to play in that particular setting? What is the theme of the character that they want to stick with? Because there is no D6 rolling to get ranges of 3 to 18 for a variety of attributes. There is a point-buy system in place, and your attributes and your skills, which together are called traits, are actually a specific size die, depending on what level of skill or what level of attribute you have. You will have a specific die size, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But before you even get into any of that, you're going to decide what is the sort of character you're going to play, and then you're going to take a look at the various different hindrances, edges, and you're going to build your character starting with those. You have ancestries, your species, and we have a few various different ancestries. They're more along the lines of fantasy species here. And of course, depending on what setting you might be playing with Savage Worlds, if it's something that's published for Savage Worlds, you're going to have a variety of other ancestries there as well, if they're applicable to that setting. Obviously enough, if you're playing some two-fisted pulp action role-playing setting, you're not going to have dwarves and elves and half-elves and things like that. There's some rules about making ancestries, creating your own ancestries as well. So you're going to be looking at hindrances and edges. And hindrances are negatives, edges are positives for your characters. And we have minor and major hindrances. And these hindrances will normally have some sort of a modifier to your action resolution die rolls. But a lot of it also plays into your role-playing prompts for the characters, like big mouth, clumsy, curious. Remember, curiosity is what killed the cat. So yes, curiosity is actually a major hindrance. Poverty, quirks, ruthless, and things along those lines. So as I mentioned, we usually have some sort of a negative modifier to an action resolution of a particular sort. But for the most part, we are looking at more along the lines of giving the players prompts as far as role-playing that character. And the edges kind of operate that way as well, but they are positives. And they are broken up by category. So we'll have like social edges, combat edges. Then we move in, we've got traits. And traits are attributes and skills. They're both traits. So there really isn't a huge difference between an attribute and a skill. It's just, if there isn't a skill for something, you're going to roll as far as the attribute. So as I mentioned, all of these are based on a die size. So everybody's going to start off with 1d4 in agility, smarts, spirit, strength, and vigor. And the players will have additional points to use to boost these up. So normally, each of the players is going to have 5 points to raise their attributes. So from a d4, you would go to a d6. From a d6, you would go to a d8, and so on up to d12. You are not rolling d20s for action resolution in this game. In fact, if you had higher than a d12, it would be 12 plus 1. If you had another level up from that, it would be d12 plus 2, and so forth. And d12 plus 2, we're talking legendary here. So this works for traits, which are attributes and skills. So the core mechanic as far as a basic success, to succeed at something, is you're going to roll your die and you're looking for 4 or higher. Now, player characters, major villains, major NPCs are called wild cards. And the wild cards will also get a wild die, which is a d6. So what you're looking to do is you're looking to score 4 or higher on your die. Doesn't matter if it's your attribute or skill die or your wild die. That is the basic resolution, your basic success. Now we also have exploding dice. I'm going to go back to a d6 here. So I'm going to be rolling a d6 as far as, let's say that's the attribute, and that's going to be the wild die. We have exploding dice. So on a d6, if I were to roll a 6 on either one of these, I'm going to roll that die again and add the new result to the total. If I roll another 6, or depending on the die, the highest face on that die, I'm going to roll it again. So this is called acing your dice. The die is an ace. Other games refer to it as exploding dice. That's the terminology we hear most of the time. Now, it's important to keep in mind, you are not adding these dice together. You are rolling these two separately, and you're going to take the highest value between the two of these. So let's just use as an example, I need a 4 or higher just for a basic success. Aha, so I failed with my trait die, but then I would succeed on my wild die. Now we also have raises. So for every 4 points higher than what you needed, you're going to get a raise. So it's along the lines of levels of success. So as an example, let's say I've got a 12-sided die to go along with my wild die. Now, if I were to roll a 12, I would be rolling this again because that is an ace. But the 12 itself would actually be a couple of raises because remember, we're looking at 4 or higher. Now, this is not combat. This is action resolution in other situations. Pretty easy to wrap your head around. Now, there are modifiers, but the modifier never changes the number that you need to roll. It's a 4. The modifiers would be plus or minus to your trait die. From what I've seen, I never saw any modifiers to your wild die. Your wild die is always just whatever is the result that you rolled. Super easy to wrap your head around. I really, really do like this core mechanic. And obviously enough, it is easier to roll a 4 on a higher die than on a smaller die. Now, I will point out there are no criticals because those are the raises. The raises are your criticals. There are critical failures, though. So if you were to roll a 1 on both dice, that is a critical failure. So as an example, it's easier with a 4-sided die to roll that 1 with another 1 and have a critical failure. And a variety of different things could be taking place. It's obviously enough up to the game master what they want that critical failure to represent, but it should be something that is entertaining and helps move the story along or add to the excitement of things. So there we've got our core action resolution. Pretty easy there. So you will find about half of the page space of this core book is devoted to hindrances, edges, powers, and skills. Now, the skills are pretty broad, and I like the fact that they are as broad as they are in this book. Now, if you want to make them more specialized, you certainly can. That is an option available to you because the reality is Savage Worlds Adventure Edition is very, very modular. And I love that fact that it's, oh, okay, I don't necessarily like that situational rule for combat. I'm going to toss that out. We're not even going to use that. Or maybe you're sitting there and you're like, hey, you know what? I've got an idea for something that's going to help speed up combat. We're going to do this. And it's not going to break anything else in the game because of how modular this is. We got a lot of information about gear. So quite a few pages are devoted to that. And then we'll get into combat. So as far as combat, we're going to change what we need to do as far as our action resolution regarding the number to hit. So remember, basic action resolution, a 4 or higher is a success. Every 4 above that is a raise. Now, you're probably thinking, well, doesn't that make things really swingy? It does, but there is some mitigation for that, and I'll talk about that in just a bit. So we're going to have an action deck, and I am using the action deck from Pathfinder 4 Savage Worlds, otherwise known as Savage Pathfinder, which the fine folks over at Pinnacle Entertainment were kind enough to share a review copy of that with me. I will have a review of that ultimate core box very shortly. It's jam-packed with goodies, and one of the goodies is the action deck. So during combat, each of the players are going to receive an action deck card, and depending on what edges they may have, they may get multiple cards and be able to choose which one they want to use. And then you're going to count down your initiative through the action deck. So as an example here, an ace of spades actually is going to go first. It's pretty wild. I pulled this out. This will be overall first, except for jokers. Jokers get to go whenever they want. So jokers are good to receive in Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. So what you're going to do is you're just going to count down through the cards that have been dealt. And as far as the non-player characters, major NPCs with their minions, their followers, their mooks will all go on one card. So you're not going to sit there and be dealing out a bunch of cards to, say, a group of goblins that are attacking the player characters. The goblins are all going to act on the same card. Now, if you wanted, if you, say, had a hobgoblin leader or an orc leader or something like that, and you wanted to kind of shake things up a little bit, yes, you could deal that leader a different card because they're obviously going to be a wild card, but you don't have to. So once again, it's another one of these little options that are available to make the game your own. And I definitely like that. It's pretty cool. These are actually really large cards. These are larger than tarot size, at least, especially in width. So very nice. And we have various different action decks available based on the Savage Worlds setting. So we have got that. All right, so let's talk about actual combat. So we're going to have melee combat. We're going to have ranged combat. And ranged combat actually works just like the basic action resolution. You need a 4 or higher to hit. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to do damage, but you simply need a 4 or higher to be able to hit. Now, things are a little different with melee combat because you're actually going to have a parry. So player characters have parries, NPCs and monsters have parries as well. So what that is if the monster, NPC, creature, whatever, has a fighting skill, you're going to take half that fighting skill die. So as an example, if it was a D6, you would take half of that, which is 3, and you're going to add 2. So you add 2 to half of the fighting die. And that is the parry. So what it means is now the player has to roll a 5 or higher. Simple enough. So the higher the fighting skill, the more difficult it'll be to hit. Now, as far as doing damage, you're going to have your damage dice. So if it is a melee weapon, you're going to have the damage die. Let's say maybe it's a D8. And then you're going to have your strength die. Let's say it's a D6, which D6 is sort of the average. You're going to roll them, add them together. So yes, in this case, for damage, you are going to add them together. You're going to compare it to the target's toughness. If you roll higher than the toughness, then you've done some sort of damage. And this is another situation where raises come into play. So for every 4 over the toughness, you're going to deal a wound. Now, just the minions, the jamokes, they only have 1 hit. So you hit them, they're out. They're out of action. Now, you can make things a little more interesting in your game as a game master if you don't have them just killed automatically on one hit. Other things can knock them out of action. So I definitely recommend going in that sort of direction as far as your role playing. But the minions and stuff, just average NPCs, people on the street, one hit, they're out of action. Wild cards, once again, the player characters, important NPCs, important monsters, they will have wounds. So the standard character, standard wild card, like a player character, is going to have 3 wounds. Now, you will not actually take any sort of penalty to your character for taking wounds until they reach a point where they will have damage effects. So here we've got shaken. Shaken is essentially where your brains have been scrambled a little bit, or you're kind of knocked off balance. For whatever reason, you can only perform free actions. And free actions are like yelling out to somebody. They're very minimal actions. Attacking is not a free action. So in essence, shaken is you're beat up, you're bruised, you're rattled, but you're not wounded. So one of the first things a player character or NPC is going to try to do when they're shaken is try to remove that shaken effect. You can do so by rolling, but we also have bennies. I'm going to get into bennies in a moment. This is where we kind of mitigate the swinginess of some of these rolls, is by use of bennies. So we've got wounds, we've got incapacitation, bleeding out. So what'll happen is first you're shaken. If you're shaken again and you're already shaken, you're going to take a wound. For every 4 over the toughness, that is a wound. So if, for an example, you rolled and you had a result of 4 over, then you're looking at shaken and a wound. Most player characters, most important NPCs, most wild cards have 3 wounds. After that, when they take their 3rd wound, then they are incapacitated. They are out of action. They could be on the verge of death. All depends. Now, we do have injuries, and injuries are what will bring negative modifiers to the player character as they take wounds. You may not get an injury, you may just get a wound. Then we get into quite a lot of situational rules for combat. So there is a good amount of crunch to combat in Savage Worlds. One negative, I would say, the way this rulebook is presented is I don't think combat is presented as well as it could as far as the flow of combat. So as an example, we've got all these situational rules: breaking things, being bound, grappling, evasion, mounted combat, prone. So all of these are just in alphabetical order. So I know I have heard through the grapevine, one of the knocks on Savage Worlds Adventure Edition is that the combat doesn't have enough crunch. I disagree. There's plenty of crunch there with the situational rules. I just don't think the combat section is presented as intuitively as it could have been. Then we start getting into Game Master facing material. We've got our adventure toolkit. We've got a bestiary. We've got dramatic tasks. So dramatic tasks are things that will not be accomplished just in a single die roll. Maybe it's something that's taking time, or maybe it's something that you have a very limited amount of time to do, like, I don't know, defusing a bomb. So I like the dramatic tasks because it brings some extra tension to the game. But once again, we've got more situational rules in here, just not necessarily for combat, just in the game overall. We've got rules for mass battles. So one of the things that Savage Worlds Adventure Edition kind of puts front and center is that the player's NPC allies should be controlled by the players, not by the game master, because the game master has enough things on their plate. So players will actually control their allies mainly in combat, not in periods of exploration or social role playing, things like that. That is then going to be the game master's forte, controlling the NPCs. But as far as combat goes, yes, your player characters should be controlling them. We have various different options here based on the sort of game you want to play. Do you want it more gritty and realistic with a higher lethality? You can easily do that. Do you want to play it where, well, your heroes, heroes don't die? You can play it that way as well. We also have powers, and the powers could be weird tech, could be magic, it could be supernatural abilities. So we get a variety of different powers here in the book as well. Now, one thing that it is pointed out that you might want to go to another supplement is if you're trying to run a 4-color superhero sort of game, then you'll want to check out the Supers supplement because it treats the powers a little bit differently. If you were using Savage Worlds Adventure Edition as a fantasy role-playing game, then the spells are considered to be powers, and you have power points that you would use in order to cast those spells, as opposed to, say, in 5e D&D, you've got spell slots. So we've got that also. Now, I had mentioned bennies, and bennies are short for benefits, and you're simply going to use tokens, of course, in the various different boxed setting sets for Savage Worlds Adventure Edition, such as Deadlands and Pathfinder for Savage Worlds. You have these little tokens that you'll utilize as bennies, and they can be used for a variety of different things. They can be used to re-roll a die roll. They can be used to soak damage, so absorb wounds in combat. They can be used to kind of change the situation as far as the game. Maybe put the player character in a more advantageous situation than what's currently going on. So they, depending on the game master, if they want to allow it, the Benny could be used to just improve the situation for the players. You can use a Benny to get rid of the shaken condition. So a lot of different things you can do with the Bennies. And one of the things that reading through these rules I do see is that unlike some games that have fate points, inspiration points, things like that, game masters should be generous with the bennies. Let the bennies flow, because one of the things it's going to do is it's going to help mitigate some of that swinginess with the die rolls, especially in combat. Now, something I have noticed by reading through the section on combat that I get the impression is that if you're looking at non-wildcard enemies, players are going to wade through them relatively easily. Big baddies, maybe not so much, especially with those bennies. So remember, those bennies, the player characters get those, the players, I should say, get those. But it's important to keep in mind, the game master gets bennies too. So as I mentioned, the bennies should flow for the game master also. There are different ways for the players to earn bennies. As an example, one of them is whenever a joker comes up for the action deck for one of the players, everybody gets a benny. Pretty cool. I like the bennies. I like the concept of the bennies. But what I would probably do to keep some of the combats with the big bads in check so they don't just become a big slog, I would maybe have a limit on how many bennies could be spent in a single combat by each player. Maybe 2, maybe 3, and for the game master as well. something to keep in mind. So then we wrap up. We'll have some templates. We've got our index as well. So that is a discussion of Savage Worlds Adventure Edition from Pinnacle Entertainment Group. Let's swing on over to the other camera. I'm going to share some final thoughts as well as provide a review score. I can see why Savage Worlds Adventure Edition is very popular with a lot of people. I can also see where it may not be everybody's cup of tea either, and I'm going to get into all of that right now. So, as far as the book itself, production quality, excellent. This book should hold up really nicely to repeated use at your game table. I like the fact that we've got a trio of bookmarks, so the game master can mark off sections that they need to return to, such as maybe the combat section, right, or parts of the combat section of the book. I really like how modular the game is as well. And I love the fact that we have so many supplements out there that, in essence, any sort of role-playing game that you want to take on, any sort of genre you're interested in, there's probably a supplement out there for Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. It's got enough crunch for most people, I would think. There is far more customization for the player characters than I have heard people grouse about. I've heard folks out there say, well, yeah, D&D has far more customization options as you go up in level. And there is character advancement, obviously enough, in Savage Worlds. But I've got to be honest, I think there's plenty of options as far as advancing your character to make them very interesting. And there's actually tiers as well. So it's not just level 1, level 2, level 3. No, we also have tiers like novice and veteran, legendary, seasoned. And there are edges and powers that have prerequisites. So if you're a novice, there's certain things that you can get. If you're seasoned, there's certain things. Some of them are legendary, that you must be at that legendary tier in order to be able to choose that as you're advancing the character. I like that quite a bit as well. Now, there are a few things I'm not super keen on as far as Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. One is the artwork. The artwork's sort of, it's all right. I mean, no offense to any of the artists out there, because I certainly know it's far better than anything I could ever come up with. But I really didn't see much as far as the artwork where it's really like, wow, man, that's getting my creative juices flowing. It's more along the lines of, no, that's all right. That's okay. That's cool. Also want to keep in mind, because this is a genreless core book, it does cover a lot of bases. So there's a lot of information in here that may not be applicable to the sort of genre you're looking to run. So once again, I had mentioned like two-fisted pulp action. You don't really need the information about half-elves and dwarves and things like that, which is in the book. I mean, that's fine. I mean, there is a lot that's covered in Savage Worlds Adventure Edition as far as trying to cover a lot of bases at one time. As far as the combat itself, yes, the die rolls with the exploding die or the ace and the raises could be very, very swingy as far as having combats where the minions, the jamokes, the mooks just get mowed down left and right, and you're just kind of clanging against the big bad because you don't have hit points. So you're not going to be wheedling down the hit points of your targets. Now you have wounds, and remember, there's the toughness. So you can hit, but if you're not rolling enough damage, all you're going to do is have a shaken condition put on the big bad. And of course, they can roll to shake that off, shake off, shaken. And they can also spend bennies to do that. So I can easily see some combats just kind of going on forever. But I can also see some of the big bads being dispatched like that with a single lucky shot with dice that continue to ace as you roll them. So that is a possibility as well. So I can see quibbles about that, but the reality is, as a game master, I can certainly overrule that where, spend a Benny, do the soak roll, because spending a Benny doesn't automatically alleviate wounds. You will roll a soak roll. So it is possible to spend a Benny and actually still take the wounds. It is a possibility. But once again, it is very possible that combats could run on and on and on, or be very anticlimactic as a player character one-shots the big bad from the entire campaign. So that could happen as well. All in all, I really like Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. I think this is very cool. I feel that it is probably going to appeal to a lot of people who might be kind of tired mechanically of 5e D&D, or even newcomers to the hobby, because the mechanics are pretty easy to wrap your head around with as you start to play. I mean, we have the basic action resolution, roll of 4. Of course, we do have some modifiers here and there. And combat, at its core, is very simple to understand as well. If it's ranged, you're still looking to try to roll a 4. And if it's melee combat, you're looking to roll higher than that parry value, which, if your target has no fighting value, is actually only 2. So at the end of the day, I really do recommend Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. I am really looking forward to experiencing more from this game line. As I mentioned previously, I have the Deadlands box set, as well as the Pathfinder for Savage Worlds box set. I will be sharing my reviews of those in the very near future, and I'm hoping I have an opportunity to see even more settings and companions for Savage Worlds. So on a scale of 0 to 10, I give Savage Worlds Adventure Edition an 8.5 out of 10. Give it a recommendation. It is certainly worth checking out. All right, that is it for this time out. If you like the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell, because it'll not only let you know when I share reviews such as this, it'll also inform you when my live show, The Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings at 7 p.m. Central right here on YouTube. And of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you will not find here on the YouTube channel. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thank you very much for watching. Happy holidays. And until I see you next time, here's hoping all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.